In recent years, a certain breed of horror film has emerged that inspires obsessive theorization. What is Aunt Gladys's origin story in Weapons? Why does the shoe stay upright in Nope? What secrets lie in the demonic words etched into Peter's walls in Hereditary, etc. At the forefront of this wave sits It Follows, David Robert Mitchell's 2014 thriller about a shape-shifting entity transmitted through sex that walks slowly toward you forever until it kills you. While many lore archaeologists have spun compelling theories as to the nature and origin of the entity, I've always found the more interesting question to be not what is the entity, but what makes a movie so impactful as to inspire this kind of engagement. Competent filmmaking is an obvious must, but a film that triggers such a frantic need for answers has to resonate on a deep psychological level. When we scour the web for lore, it's not just about filling in the gaps with details, it's also an attempt to articulate a feeling that the movie is planted deep within our psyche. It's tempting to interpret the entity as a metaphor for STDs or the perils of teen sex, but not only has the director downplayed that reading, frankly, it doesn't do justice to the richness of the film. Because I'd argue It Follows taps into something much deeper than just our fear of icky naughty bits, something that, to some of the world's greatest thinkers, represents one of the heaviest burdens a person can carry: certainty.
The worst thing is that it is certain.
And not just the certainty of death, but the certainty of life, that it becomes defined by fixed obligations, known outcomes, and inescapable realities. At its core, It Follows dramatizes an inevitable dimming of the soul, that melancholy period in our lives when we all become a little more certain about what life will be like. So what can one of the most influential horror films in recent memory tell us about the soul's absolute need for uncertainty? Well, to find out, we're gonna have to take a trip through the ruins of old Detroit, pay a visit to my favorite French existentialist, and dig up one of the most iconic Russian novels ever written. Let's dive in. But first, a quick recap. It follows Jay, a college student riding the high of an exciting new romance with a guy named Hugh. After banging in the backseat of his convertible, Hugh chloroforms her, straps her to a wheelchair, and explains that he's passed on a shape-shifting entity that will relentlessly walk toward her until it kills her. Her only out is to pass it on to someone else through sex. From then on, Jay begins to see the slow-walking entity everywhere. Since it's invisible to everyone else, her friends are largely skeptical, save for Paul, whose unrequited love for Jay makes him eager to believe her. Later, when an invisible force attacks her on the beach, the reality of the entity becomes undeniable to everyone, except for the cool guy, Greg, who sleeps with Jay to ease her mind and prove that everything is all good. But the reprieve is short-lived as the entity tracks down Greg and murders him. With the target back on Jay, the group devises a plan to lure it to a swimming pool and electrocute it, but the plan is a complete fail. The entity cannot be stopped. Accepting her reality, Jay sleeps with Paul, and Paul spreads it to some ladies of the night to buy some time. The film ends with the two of them walking together hand in hand, fighting the slow approach of the inevitable as a team. The end. Okay, so there are two really interesting things about It Follows that distinguish it from other horror movies. The first is that the film establishes all the rules up front. About 20 minutes in, Hugh information dumps the mechanics of the entity, and from that point on, we learn nothing of consequence. Sure, we find out that headshots don't quite cut it, the entity maybe doesn't like water, and it's functionally the Invisible Man, but there are no meaningful revelations. See, one of the pleasures of horror films lies in a kind of game they invite the audience to play, in which a given model of reality is destabilized, and then we follow the characters as they attempt to reconstruct a new one. So, a horror flick will start with something eerie that contradicts our grasp of the world. Take Weapons, for example. Spoilers, by the way. A bunch of kids from the same classroom disappear into the night at the very same time. That's impossible, so reality is destabilized. We then follow the characters as they discover the rules that comprise an updated, stable model of reality. In Weapons, the ensemble learns that a centuries-old witch uses some kind of voodoo to possess people. We now know we live in a world where magic exists. A new model of reality is established. Or in Get Out, the help's behavior doesn't quite make sense.
Working you good out here, huh?
Nothing I don't want to be doing.
reality is destabilized. Eventually it's revealed that rich white people are body-snatching black victims. A new model of reality, one in which such a process is possible and desirable, is established. That in-between time when we linger in uncertainty between two models is where much of the horror lies. Nothing makes sense and anything is possible, so we gotta keep our guard up. But that's not how It Follows works. We're told the rules of this new reality immediately, and for the vast majority of the film, we're certain as to what's happening. The horror, then, isn't about staying vigilant from the unknown, it's about dreading the inevitable. The second unique element is related to the first, how the film eradicates hope entirely. In many respects, It Follows is a slasher film. It's got sexually active teens marked for death, a relentless killer that cannot be reasoned with, etc. However, in many of these movies, the third act is defined by hope that the big bad can be evaded or defeated. In A Nightmare on Elm Street, Nancy realizes she can drag Freddy from the dream world into reality where he's vulnerable, and she succeeds in stopping him, at least until the sequel. In It Follows, sure, there's a similar third act attempt, but it's an epic fail and our heroes end up exactly where they started, certain of the rules that dictate their inevitable demise with no hope to change their fate. And the film even argues that this hopeless certainty is more terrifying than fear of the unknown, and it does so via a literary reference.
What are you reading? The Idiot? Is it any good?
Throughout the film, Yara cites a particularly famous section from Dostoevsky's The Idiot known as Mishkin's gallows speech, in which the main character muses about how it's infinitely worse to be executed by the state than murdered by a criminal. Why? Because of certainty. If you're attacked by some psycho on the street, at least you have the hope that you can escape, or that he'll miss, or that he sucks at being a criminal. Mishkin says, a murder by sentence is far more dreadful than a murder committed by a criminal. The man who is attacked by robbers at night in a dark wood or anywhere undoubtedly hopes and hopes that he may escape yet until the very moment of his death. The man attacked by robbers is akin to the logic of other slasher films. With Freddy Krueger, you can escape his clutches. With the right plan, he can even be bested. Same goes with Chucky, Jason, Michael Myers, etc. There's at least a chance. The final girl really can survive. The entity, on the other hand, operates like the man sentenced to death. There is no hope, it's just a matter of time, and sitting with that soul-crushing agony is the worst thing imaginable.
And the most terrible agony may not be in the wounds themselves, but in knowing for certain that within an hour and within half a minute, now, at this very instant, your soul will leave your body and you will no longer be a person. And that this is certain. The worst thing is that it is certain.
When the state sentences someone to death, it's cold and procedural, like The Entity. There's nothing personal like Michael Myers' pursuit of Laurie Strode, no score to settle like Ghostface. It's just a slow, mechanical march. This isn't the horror of walking home at night in a shady part of town. This is the crippling anxiety of getting a terminal diagnosis or a letter from the IRS. It's the terrifying, creeping dread of an unstoppable force designed to ruin you. The brutality of this anxiety is emphasized via another literary reference.
I should have been a pair of ragged claws, scuttling across the floors of silent seas.
Jay's professor is reading T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, perhaps the definitive poem about modern anxiety. It depicts Prufrock going to a party, thinking about doing something bold, and then anxiously talking himself out of it and going home feeling like a schmuck. It's a tragedy of inaction, the same kind of inaction that you're tempted with when you know your demise is guaranteed.
Listen to this. I think that if one is faced with inevitable destruction, one must feel a great longing to sit down, close one's eyes, and wait.
Come what may.
Because for Dostoevsky, at least the physical pain of being murdered is over quickly, unlike the mental anguish of hopelessly awaiting death.
When there's torture, there's pain and wounds, physical agony, and all this distracts the mind from mental suffering so that one is tormented by the wounds until the moment of death.
Almost a century later, philosopher Albert Camus, very likely inspired by The Idiot, he was kind of obsessed with Dostoevsky, wrote a condemnation of capital punishment called Reflections on the Guillotine. He argued that this kind of administrative murder isn't eye for an eye justice. The murderer who is sentenced to death suffers more than his victim because he's got to sit with the knowledge of his upcoming demise plus the actual death. His soul is first destroyed, then his body, double the punishment. Dostoevsky and Camus were making the same point. The soul requires uncertainty to survive. To remove it is to inflict a wound on the spirit worse than any physical violence. And this horror of certainty is the key to It Follows. The certainty of death via the entity, yes, but also that specific stage of growing up when life stops feeling like an open horizon of possibilities and starts feeling like a series of predictable certainties, because with the loss of uncertainty also comes the loss of freedom. During Jay's date with Hugh, she suggests they play a people-watching game called the Trade Game.
You start by watching the crowd. Now, without telling me, pick a person that you'd want to trade places with.
Contrary to her expectations, Hugh picks a kid.
I mean, how cool would that be to have your whole life out of you, you know? Plus, at that age, you can go to the bathroom anytime you want. Total freedom.
When you're young, there's an uncertainty to life. Who knows? Maybe you'll be an astronaut. Maybe love will carry you across the globe on wild adventures. Maybe the world works in miraculous ways. But the older you get, the narrower the possibilities become. Life feels less like a series of novel revelations and more like a succession of predictable obligations. And one of the great casualties of this shift is the romantic fantasy of suburban love. It's worth mentioning that Mitchell's previous film, The Myth of the American Sleepover, examined the suburban myth of adolescence.
It's a myth.
A myth of what?
Being a teenager.
And so with It Follows, he continues his interrogation of the romantic stories suburban kids tell themselves about growing up. Mitchell cites John Carpenter's depiction of the suburbs as a big inspiration. Like Carpenter, Mitchell frames the suburbs as a state of mind. Wide streets, manicured lawns, a deceptive sense of safety, and of course, romantic ideals. It Follows is saturated with imagery and tropes that evoke the myth of suburban romance. On her date, Jay is adorned in pink dress, pink underwear. She eats ice cream with sprinkles, fidgets with blades of grass, and when things get too real, she finds refuge at a swing set. She's the archetypal girl next door. Horny teenagers are everywhere in this movie.
I see you.
Everyone in the friend group is constantly checking each other out, and Paul recounts the culturally ubiquitous narrative of stumbling upon an adult stash of
Do you remember the time that we found those magazines?
Yeah.
We were such stupid kids.
Jay's date with Hugh has all the markers of a suburban date. Movies, makeout sesh at the beach, which might as well be the point, then sex in the backseat of a convertible. Beat for beat, the romantic narrative generations were raised on. But afterwards, Jay reflects on catching up with those expectations.
It's funny. We used to daydream about being old enough to go on dates, drive around with friends in their cars. It's never about going anywhere, really. It's having some sort of freedom, I guess, now that we're old enough. Where the hell do we go?
When you're young, uncertainty leaves room for fantasy to run wild, but once you're old enough to pursue those fantasies, the mystery evaporates and the experiences that were supposed to unlock freedom actually start to feel a little bit more predictable, a little less free, and more certain. Even cars, usually symbols for American freedom, become traps for Jay. Every time she hops into a car to escape, she finds no freedom, just the end of the road. It Follows captures the moment youthful uncertainty yields to adult certainty, where every choice locks in new responsibilities and narrows the range of who you can be. Sexual liberation feels less like liberation when you have to recognize the mess sex can create, and romantic love has to take a back seat to practical concerns, hence Jay's final act decision to return Paul's affections. She ends up with Paul, not because he's in line with her romantic dreams, he's not the cool guy with the convertible like Hugh, he's not the devil-may-care ladies man like Greg, he's the guy who can help her survive. When we're young, romance is poetry. It's about feelings and what-ifs. But as we mature, romance becomes about schedules, safety, and making it work. It's an inevitable dimming of the soul that we all go through, and the entity is that melancholy stage of life cranked up to 11, when certainty eats away at the freedoms and hopes that come with youthful uncertainty. Over a year ago, I made a video exploring one of Apocalypse Now's key inspirations, a seminal work in cultural anthropology, The Golden Bough by Sir James George Frazer. Frazer argued that all religion and myth stemmed from humanity's fundamental primal need for certainty. For our ancestors, the viability of the tribe depended entirely on the harvest, so rituals and myths were formed to engineer a psychological guarantee that the crops would yield and the bloodline would continue. For the pre-modern mind, uncertainty was the ultimate horror. But perhaps for the modern mind, it's the opposite. Life may be an ever-narrowing path, but we desperately cling to those gaps of knowledge so we can project the possibility that inspiration and transformation can still lie ahead. Maybe Frazer was only half right. We not only use the imagination to save ourselves from the chaos of the unknown, but also from the despair of the known. We have to believe that the future is still unwritten, that our fate isn't walking slowly and relentlessly toward us in a straight line. Because, as Dostoevsky said, to fail to do so is nothing less than an outrage on the soul. Hey, y'all, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel because the next video I got coming up, I'm actually quite excited about, is on the Exorcist films. Sorry, by the time I recorded this, I have a little bit of a cold. Be sure to follow me on Letterboxd, Instagram. If you'd like to donate to the channel, there's links below in the description. I've logged almost 300 films in 2025 on Letterboxd, so definitely follow me there, and I hope you guys are having a great holiday season. Peace.